When HOA Karen pulled a gun on my daughter for refusing to join their HOA, I thought they'd finally crossed the line. But they didn't realize my daughter is the real sheriff, trained, fearless, and ready to fight back. What started as a simple threat exploded into a deadly showdown, and what Karen uncovered about my daughter changed everything. We moved into this neighborhood thinking it would be peaceful, quiet, just a place where neighbors nodded hello and kids played safely on the sidewalks. The houses all looked perfect, lawns manicured to the inch, flowers blooming in neat little beds, and every porch had that same beige paint, the same style, the same perfect little mailbox that stood at attention beside the curb. The HOA seemed like the invisible hand keeping order, making sure everything stayed pretty and clean and quiet. It was easy to assume they were just doing their job. But there was always something off about them, about Karen in particular. You could see it in her eyes, the way she smiled too tight, the way she lingered in conversation just a little too long, asking questions no one really needed answers to. She was the kind of person who believed the neighborhood belonged to her, like she had the keys to the whole street and every lawn was her kingdom. She strutted around like a queen, clipboard in hand, ready to judge anyone who dared to live in her domain without bowing down to her rules. When my daughter told me she wasn't going to join the HOA, I thought maybe it was just a passing thing. Kids can be rebellious, after all. But she was serious. She said she didn't want to be part of some club that told her what color to paint her door, how high her grass had to grow. She said she wanted to live free, not under the thumb of people like Karen who took their little power trips too far. It started with letters, polite at first, reminders to pay dues, invitations to meetings. Then came the calls, insistent and increasingly aggressive. Karen's voice was sharp, like a warning shot fired from a gun you couldn't see. "You're going to want to reconsider," she'd say. "We all have to pull together for the good of the neighborhood." It wasn't a request. It was an order. My daughter ignored them. She wanted no part of the meetings where they talked about paint colors, garden gnomes, and parking rules. She wanted to live without the constant nagging and surveillance. She told me it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle, about standing up to people who thought they could control everyone else. One afternoon, I heard the doorbell ring. My daughter opened the door to find Karen standing there, clipboard in hand, the sun casting harsh shadows on her face. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We really need to talk," Karen said. "You're causing a lot of trouble by refusing to join. It's not just about dues. It's about community." My daughter crossed her arms. "I'm part of this community. I just don't want to be forced to pay to be accepted." Karen's smile tightened. "You think you're above the rules? Everyone has to do their part." Her tone shifted, colder now. "You can't just opt out." "I'm not opting out," my daughter said. "I'm just not buying into your little club." Karen took a step closer. "You don't get to choose. This is how we keep order. Without the HOA, the neighborhood falls apart. You don't want that, do you?" "I want to live in a place where people respect my choices," my daughter said. "Not where people threaten me." Karen's face twisted like she was trying to hold back something fierce, something dangerous. "Threaten you? Who's threatening who?" The conversation ended without resolution, but the message was clear. This wasn't going to stop. Karen and the HOA were not just a bureaucracy. They were a force, and they weren't going to back down. In the following days, the tension grew. My daughter felt eyes on her wherever she went. Neighbors who once smiled now looked away or whispered when she passed. Flyers appeared on our doorstep, messages thinly veiled with threats about the consequences of noncompliance. The mailbox was filled with official-looking letters warning about fines, penalties, legal action. Karen's presence loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, dark and inevitable. The neighborhood meetings became battlegrounds. Karen led them with a tyrant's zeal, barking orders, calling out dissenters, making examples of those who questioned her authority. It was clear she wanted to break my daughter, to make her bend to the will of the HOA or pay a steep price. But my daughter wasn't scared. She knew who she was. She'd spent years in training, years on the streets, knowing danger intimately, understanding power and responsibility in a way most people never could. Karen had no idea what she was up against. One evening, when the sun was low and the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange, Karen came by again. This time, she didn't come with just words. There was a coldness in her eyes that wasn't there before, a recklessness born of frustration and desperation. "You don't get to make choices for the neighborhood," Karen said, her voice low and hard. "You're going to join whether you like it or not." My daughter's gaze didn't waver. "You don't scare me." Karen's hand moved suddenly, pulling something out from beneath her jacket. A gun. It gleamed in the fading light, a threat carved in cold metal. "You listen to me now," Karen said. "This is your final warning." But my daughter stayed calm, steady as a rock in a raging sea. "You don't want to do this," she said quietly. "You don't know who I am." Karen laughed, bitter and harsh. "I don't care who you are. You'll fall in line like everyone else." That was her mistake. That was when everything changed. The door slammed shut behind her, a sharp click that echoed louder than it should have, as if the whole neighborhood was waiting to hear what would happen next. The air was thick, almost suffocating, the kind of stillness that comes just before a storm breaks loose. Karen's eyes locked onto hers, narrow and hard like twin daggers, daring her to flinch or back down. The clipboard in Karen's hand was pressed tightly against her chest, fingers digging into the edges like it was some kind of weapon, but the real weapon was the cold, unyielding glare that didn't waver for a second. "You're making this harder than it has to be," Karen said, voice deceptively calm but dripping with venom beneath the surface. "You can either do this the easy way or the hard way. You know what I mean." The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening, and for a moment it was like the whole world had shrunk down to just the two of them, facing off like boxers in a ring, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Her pulse didn't race, didn't pound in her ears. Instead was a cold clarity cutting through the tension, sharper than any fear. "I already told you. I'm not joining. I'm not paying. I'm not bowing to you or your rules." The words came out steady, firm, each syllable a deliberate act of defiance. Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you're above everyone else? You think you can just opt out like this is a game?" Her voice rose a notch, the calm mask slipping, revealing the fury underneath. "This neighborhood is a community. We all have responsibilities. You're not special." "No," she said quietly but fiercely. "I'm not special. I'm just not scared of you." Karen's hand jerked suddenly, pulling the jacket tighter around her like she was shielding herself from something invisible, then reaching underneath with quick, practiced movements. The glint of metal caught the light, cold and undeniable. A gun pulled out with no hesitation, pointed straight at her chest. The moment stretched, time slowing, the heat of the barrel almost tangible against her skin even from a distance. "Enough of this nonsense," Karen snapped, voice sharp as a whip. "Join or I'll make you." The neighborhood might have been quiet, but the violence in that room screamed louder than any siren. Her eyes didn't dart away, didn't blink in panic. Instead, they locked on Karen's, steady and unflinching, a silent challenge burning there. "You don't have to do this," she said, voice low but unwavering. "Put the gun down. Walk away." The seconds crawled, tension thick enough to choke on. Karen's knuckles widened around the gun handle, jaw clenched tight. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she growled, finger twitching near the trigger. The threat was clear, the danger immediate, but so was the calm that wrapped around her like armor. "I'm a sheriff," she said, voice steady and cold. "You want to find out what that means?" The color drained from Karen's face, the smirk fading into a shocked, ugly mix of fear and disbelief. The gun wavered, just for a heartbeat, the balance of power shifting like a tide turning. "You can't be," Karen whispered, voice cracking. The entire confrontation was a tightrope stretched over a chasm of chaos, and Karen was teetering dangerously close to falling off. "Call your backup," she hissed, almost desperate now, eyes darting around for support that wouldn't come. "You're done here." But it was clear she knew she was beaten before the fight even began. The gun lowered slowly, reluctantly, the weapon losing its threat with each inch it fell. "You're lucky I'm letting you walk away," Karen spat, but the words lacked conviction. "Next time, it won't be so easy." The air shifted instantly, the storm breaking as Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving behind a silence louder than any gunshot. Her hand shook just slightly as she closed the door, heart pounding in a rhythm she didn't try to hide. She knew the power she held in that moment wasn't just in the gun. It was in the quiet, unshakable strength that came from knowing who she was, what she stood for, and that she would never be intimidated. The neighbors whispered behind drawn curtains, stories already spreading like wildfire. The HOA might have tried to bully her, threaten her, but it was clear they underestimated the sheriff. Karen's rage might have been fierce, but it was no match for the steel beneath her calm. The neighborhood would never see her the same way again. She was no longer just a resident who refused to join. She was the law, and the law was not someone you threatened with a gun. The message was clear, unspoken, but understood by all. Crossing her was a line nobody wanted to test. The gun was down, but the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning, and she was ready. You think you're in control? You think this street belongs to you. You think you can push people around just because you're loud and you hold a clipboard. You don't know who you're messing with. The gun still shaking slightly in Karen's hand, her face pale but stubborn, like a cornered animal backed against a wall, eyes darting like she's searching for an escape route that doesn't exist. "You have no idea who I am," she said quietly, almost a whisper, but the words cut through the tension like a knife. Karen's grip faltered the first time, the metal barrel wavering just a hair. "Don't play games." The voice was cold now, hard and unyielding, an edge that hadn't been there before. "You're not scared. You should be." The silence stretched long enough to feel like an eternity. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And then she moved, not fast but deliberate, steady, every motion carrying the weight of authority and years spent walking into danger without blinking. The badge flashed in the dim light, the silver gleaming like a beacon. The sheriff. The real sheriff. Karen's eyes widened, the sneer slipping away into something closer to disbelief. "You? That can't be. You're just some kid who lives here, who defies me." The gun dropped, clattering on the floor, a sharp metallic sound breaking the stillness. It wasn't fear that filled Karen's face now, but shock and anger tangled together, a storm ready to explode but caught in the eye of its own chaos. "You don't get to use that as an excuse. You think being a sheriff means you're above the rules? The rules I enforce? The neighborhood's rules?" She laughed bitterly, but it was hollow, like a cracked mask slipping off to reveal panic beneath. "I enforce the law, not your petty rules. And you don't threaten people with guns. You don't intimidate neighbors. You don't run this neighborhood like it's your personal kingdom." Karen's breath came fast now, hands shaking as she struggled to pull herself together to reclaim whatever scraps of control she could. "Back up," she hissed, voice barely audible, as if willing reinforcements to materialize out of thin air. But there was no one coming. Not for her. Not this time. The sheriff took a step forward, calm and commanding. "This ends now. No more threats. No more intimidation. You're going to put the gun down, leave this street, and never come back." Karen's shoulders slumped for a moment, the fight draining out of her like a deflated balloon. But then, as if summoning every last ounce of defiance, she spat, "You're lucky I'm letting you walk away. Next time it won't be so easy." The sheriff didn't flinch. That threat meant nothing now. She knew the real power in this moment was hers. The power of truth, of law, of standing firm against fear. The gun was forgotten on the floor, a useless piece of metal against unshakable resolve. The neighbors watched from behind windows, whispered among themselves, the balance of power shifting in front of their eyes. The sheriff wasn't just a resident anymore. She was the shield and the sword of this community. Karen had underestimated her, and now the entire neighborhood knew it. The sheriff's gaze swept the street, calm and unwavering, a silent promise that order and justice weren't just words, they were a way of life. And anyone who tried to bend the rules with threats and guns would face the full weight of the law. The door closed behind Karen with a dull thud, the sound final and absolute. The sheriff stood alone for a moment, breathing steady, heart strong. This was no longer about neighborhood rules or dues or cliques. This was about standing up to fear, standing up to bullies, standing up to people who thought they could own others by pointing a gun and shouting orders. This was the reveal. The moment the illusion shattered and the real power was shown, not in threats, not in intimidation, but in quiet strength, in courage, in the law. The sheriff was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. The neighborhood was buzzing in a way it never had before, Whispers and murmurs slipping through open windows, rolling down sidewalks, gathering speed like wildfire racing across dry grass. No one could ignore what had happened, the sharp fracture in the peaceful facade of their carefully curated community. It was more than just a confrontation. It was a reckoning, a raw exposure of the cracks beneath the pristine lawns and freshly painted doors. The HOA, which had once held itself up as the guardian of order, was suddenly vulnerable, its power shaken by the revelation that the daughter refusing to bow down was no ordinary resident, but the real sheriff, someone who could enforce the law instead of just rules and dues. People were divided. Some felt a surge of admiration for her, a fierce pride that one of their own had stood tall against intimidation and violence, had stared down a gun and come out stronger. Others, loyal to the HOA or fearful of upsetting the delicate balance, whispered doubts, trying to rationalize or diminish what had happened. They spoke of neighborhood harmony, of the importance of rules, of the dangers of rebellion. But beneath the polite conversations and the polite smiles, a tension simmered. A quiet war brewing between those who sought to keep the hall's iron grip and those who wanted freedom from its suffocating control. The letters started arriving soon after. Formal notices, threats of fines, warnings about lawsuits, official-sounding documents that tried to reassert control through bureaucracy rather than force. But the sheriff wasn't just any resident. She knew the law intimately, understood the limits of the HOA's authority, and refused to be cowed by empty threats. Karen's position crumbled rapidly, isolated now, facing not just the sheriff's quiet but relentless power, but also the growing unease among neighbors. The community meetings became battlegrounds not just of ideas, but of shifting alliances, with voices rising to challenge the old guard, calling out abuses of power, demanding transparency and respect for individual rights. The HOA board, once unchallenged, found itself on the defensive, scrambling to regain trust that was rapidly eroding. The sheriff's family felt the weight of the fallout deeply. There were moments of fear and frustration, the knowledge that standing up to bullying could bring consequences that reached far beyond a single incident. Yet beneath the surface was a steadfast resolve, not just to protect their own, but to change the neighborhood's culture, to replace fear with respect, intimidation with accountability. Stories of the confrontation spread beyond the street, catching the attention of local media and community advocates who saw it as a symbol of the fight against oppressive neighborhood control. The sheriff became a quiet figure of strength, not seeking the spotlight but standing firm in her commitment to justice and fairness. Karen faced investigations, questions about her conduct, and the real possibility of legal repercussions. The gun incident was no longer a secret whisper behind closed doors, but a defining moment that forced a reckoning about power, responsibility, and the true meaning of community. Slowly, the neighborhood began to heal, though not without scars. The old rules and expectations shifted as new voices emerged, ones that valued freedom and individual dignity as much as order and cooperation. It was a hard-won transformation born from courage in the face of fear, from truth spoken loudly in a place long ruled by silence and intimidation. The sheriff remained vigilant, a steady presence who reminded everyone that real safety comes not from fear and control, but from respect, law, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The fallout wasn't just about what happened on that tense afternoon. It was about the future, about reclaiming a community for everyone, not just a few who thought they owned it. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Power can be a quiet thing or it can be a roaring force, but in places like this neighborhood, it often hides behind rules, bylaws, and the illusion of community. The HOA's grip isn't about keeping the grass cut or paint colors uniform. It's about control, about policing lives under the guise of order. It's about fear dressed up as responsibility, threats wrapped in polite language, and the constant pressure to conform or suffer consequences. What happened wasn't just an incident between a stubborn daughter and a jealous HOA enforcer. It was a flashpoint, a crack in the foundation of how these organizations operate unchecked, wielding power without accountability. The idea that someone could point a gun at a neighbor over something as simple as refusing to join a club is chilling. It exposes the danger of giving groups like HOAs too much authority, when oversight is minimal, when rules become weapons, and when dissent is crushed not through dialogue but intimidation. This isn't unique to one street or one town. Across the country, people are trapped in neighborhoods where their choices are stripped away, where every detail of their homes and lives can be dictated by a few people hiding behind legal documents. It's a reminder that power, when concentrated and unchecked, becomes abusive. The real question is what we do with this knowledge. Do we accept that safety means compliance? That peace means silence? Or do we challenge it? The sheriff's stand was more than personal. It was a beacon. It was a statement that no amount of threats or force can suppress the right to live freely and with dignity. That standing up to bullying is not just brave, it's necessary. Change begins when people refuse to be silent, when they expose the truth behind the polished facade, when neighbors come together not out of fear, but out of shared respect and strength. The aftermath saw more than just tension. It sparked conversations, sometimes heated, sometimes hopeful, about what community really means. It revealed how easily the line between order and oppression can blur when power is left unchecked. There's a need for clear boundaries, for laws that protect residents from harassment disguised as enforcement. There's a need for transparency, for boards that serve the community instead of controlling it. There's a need for voices that speak up, and for neighbors who look out for one another instead of turning away. This incident is a call to action, a warning sign flashing red. We can't let intimidation become the norm. We can't let people with guns or rules dictate lives without consequences. And we can't let the ideal of community be twisted into a weapon against those who dare to say no. The sheriff's courage is a reminder that justice isn't just a word on paper. It's an active force that requires vigilance and strength. It's about holding those in power accountable, about protecting rights even when it's uncomfortable. It's about standing up when others might stay silent. The bigger picture isn't just about one neighborhood or one confrontation. It's about reclaiming our communities, redefining what safety and respect mean. It's about refusing to live in fear of those who misuse their authority. It's about building spaces where people are free to be themselves, to make choices without coercion, to live without threats hanging over their heads. The sheriff's story is a warning, a lesson, and a beacon. It challenges us all to examine the systems that govern our lives and to demand better. Because true community isn't built on control or fear, but on trust, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. This moment marks the beginning of something bigger, an awakening to the dangers of unchecked power and unstoppable force of those who refuse to be silenced. The fight is far from over, but with courage like hers leading the way, there's hope that freedom and justice will win in the end.